Coming up on Help Before You Sell.
There's things that they are thinking and feeling, maybe thinking that they don't have anything to say, that their message isn't unique enough.
And that constant flow between listening to what someone's saying to then generate a question that delves deeper and creates that empathy is a super important part of that ecosystem that just rolls round and round.
You should be doing everything you can in your business to help potential clients before you sell to your potential clients. I'm having all these great conversations with people and I'm hearing things. It would be great to have a way of categorizing and noting stuff down. And I think, Rob, what you've just described there is the perfect tool. Does marketing and content creation ever feel hard and time-consuming? What if it didn't have to be that way?
Join Rob Drummond,
Matthew Bliss,
and me, Pete Daly-Dixon, your ideal companions on the journey to a value-first approach to business growth, here on Help Before You Sell.
So we were talking last time about understanding your uniqueness or genius before you go out into the world and try to help before you sell. The next step, I think, is then looking out at your audience and trying to understand, well, where are they in their current level of thinking? One of my favorite copywriting books is the Robert Collier Letter Book. Don't know if you guys have read this.
Oh my God, you have that. I didn't think that was...
It's back in print.
Is it really?
Yeah, someone put it back in print, so it's on Amazon at a sensible price, and it's genius. It was written pretty much 100 years ago. Robert Collier was, he did a few things, didn't he? But he was a direct response guy who sold stuff through the mail, and he sold all kinds of things like sequences of books, amongst other things. But he basically told immense product stories.
I know he's famous for that saying, isn't it? Enter the conversation that's going on inside your customer's head.
Yep, and it comes from the Robert Collier Letter Book. So he would, I view him as like a master of empathy. So empathy is understanding other people and getting a feel for what they're thinking about, worried about, because I think you can only really help people until you kind of have a feel for that. I feel like most marketing service providers, I probably learned about this the hard way. I actually think it maybe stems from a grammar school education as well, where you kind of go through this kind of grammar school education and they force you to play rugby, which is teaching you to like run through walls and get ahead in your career. And you kind of nurture this. It's never really stated, but it's a bit like, hey, you're a grammar school student. You're better than them. and then so you set out in business, you set out in the world, and you just like assume you know what people want. And then I was working in my early self-employed career as a Google Ads consultant. Took on one particular client, which sticks in my mind. It was a technical project. It was I won't say exactly what it was, but it was an IT-based company. There was definitely a search market. There were people searching for what he did and for terms around it. And I looked at that. I created a set of ads. I created a landing page that I was fairly sure was going to work. We spent a decent amount of money on it because the clicks, being IT related, were quite expensive. And the internet yawned in my face, and that was really the first time the internet yawned in my face and gone, oh man, I've missed a few. Like, I don't actually know anything about these people. Like there was obviously a problem because people go to Google because they've got a problem, not for fun or to connect with friends or whatever they do on social media. There was something that they were looking for that caused them to go to Google, but I've not been able to understand that and provide that in either the ad or the landing page. And it just made me think. And then, so since then, my confidence in understanding other people started off at about 90%. I was like, yeah, I know about people. I feel like I've got a reasonable grasp of what people are thinking. And then the longer I've done this, that confidence level has gone to it's somewhere about, I don't know, 25% now, where I'm like, okay, yeah, I basically know jack shit. So yeah, that's what I wanted to explore today was, okay, we've got a reasonable grasp of, or we think we've started the process of understanding ourselves. How do we go out and understand other people? I wondered if you guys had any comments on my kind of intro. intro story there.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, all for laughs, obviously, is if you're a psychopath, don't go into marketing because you have no empathy.
Or a sociopath, yeah. I think there's plenty of roles in government for that.
Joking aside there, Rob, you're absolutely right. I have so many conversations a week with so many amazing people. I think I need to find a way of starting to categorize them and organize them and stuff, and where I hear different things. Maybe I should just make notes as I go. But someone said recently, it all starts with listening. It all starts with listening. I can't think of the context that came up in conversation, but it's ultimately what you're saying there, and it's what Stephen Covey said in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Seek first to understand before being understood. It's the second principle. The first is begin with the end in mind. The second is seek first to understand before being understood. And that's exactly what you're talking about.
Most people don't really listen, I think, as well, or not like, I think it's called active listening, isn't it? Where you're like really truly paying attention, not just thinking what you're going to say next.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's why initially when I started Not a Straight Line, the podcast, I was like, whoa, right, let's have let's record 3 episodes a day and let's just go for it. But I realized very quickly that the energy that was required to truly listen, like you were talking about there, to really be in that conversation, one conversation like that a day, and that's, I'm done.
I can second that from working on podcast activation and doing an activation call, well, doing what we call an activation call with our clients, where I'll speak to someone for 2+ hours about their work, their story. It's hard work. It's like you come away and usually your energy is quite high because these conversations do kind of replenish your energy, but I wouldn't want to be jumping straight into another one.
It's the reason people don't do it because it's hard and they don't want to do the work, or because there are particular skills required that are difficult to acquire, so they don't do the work, or something else?
I feel like it's a conscious decision to go out and say, okay, I'm going to do this project effectively, to go out and speak to people and have conversations. Like, it doesn't have to be as part of a podcast. It doesn't have to be interview. I mean, it could be inviting guests onto your podcast. That's one option, but it could just be emailing your list. Something I've done in the past and encourage clients to do is to do like a time trade with their list. Say, look, I'm doing a bit of research into what people really want for next year. Could we do a time trade where it's an hour-long conversation? I'll give you 30 minutes of my consulting time expertise, and I'd like to just speak to you for 30 minutes about what you're doing and get your feedback.
What a great idea.
And that's worked really well at times.
So the key is getting the two-way conversation going. Like, the active listening is one part of the components that you need. But my immediate thought, going off the back of your story, Rob, is to ask questions, which you guys lead into there. In my philosophy background, the idea of Socratic questioning was incredibly powerful for me, not just because I'm a nuisance in conversation and like to play a devil's advocate, but also to create challenging questions, you need to be mindful about what you're asking. And that constant flow between listening to what someone's saying to then generate a question that delves deeper and creates that empathy is a super important part of that ecosystem that just rolls round and round, and why you're so tired at the end of a 2-hour conversation and you can't do 6 of them a day, because it's always all energy if you're switched on and trying to tap into that empathy space.
I used to have a client who was very demanding. I was managing all of the communications that went out for the company. So I was writing a lot of emails. Email marketing was a big part of the strategy. And my client was like, didn't really get it. She was like, you know what? I write emails all day. I probably send about 20 emails a day. So therefore, you should be able to send 20 emails a day. And I was like, yeah, I could send 20 emails a day, but I'm also trying to get into the head of the recipients and trying to craft something that's going to resonate and generate a response. And that is not, that's different to you sitting in your office banging out some emails about some stuff you need people to do.
There's so many jumping off points there to talk about anything in the modern world, from productivity to artificial intelligence, LLMs, and generating that kind of product and comparing volume to quality. All those things, super important. But yeah, spending the time on that empathy means that you probably get more value out of the 5 you send in the same time as that person does 20 if they're not doing the same thing.
So just bringing it back to the central premise of this podcast, which is that you should be doing everything you can in your business to help potential clients before you sell to your potential clients. How do I consciously, actively, deliberately use what we're talking about here, this empathy, this active listening? How do I go about it, and how do I then use it to help before I sell?
Well, I think the first step is making sure that you're having those conversations for some purpose. And it could be, again, it could be to interview someone for a podcast, or it could just be to ask them for their input, ask them for help, potentially. I kind of like the empathy map as well. I don't know if you guys saw that. So just for the listener, I kind of like the empathy map, which is a model that you can look up. I don't know who created this actually. It was something that I've heard talked about in the past. So step one would be to make sure you're having these conversations, but then it's like, okay, when people are saying stuff to you, what do you then do with that? So the empathy map has 6 boxes, if you like, for noting down things that the person that you're speaking to, things that they're seeing. So in a podcasting sense, people might be seeing that podcasting is a growth medium. People might be seeing that podcasting seems to have an influence in major events, such as the last US election, for instance. There are things that they're hearing. And actually, there's probably a bit of overlap here between what they're seeing, what they're hearing. Perhaps they're seeing more podcasts, but perhaps they're hearing that, the impact of these things did have an impact on certain events. So perhaps that belongs in the hear section. There's things that they are thinking and feeling, maybe thinking that they don't have anything to say, or that their message isn't unique enough. And again, these are things that might emerge in the conversation. It might just be things that kind of you get an intuitive sense for as well. And the more vulnerable and open a conversation you can have with someone about this, like the more's going to emerge. There's things that they're saying and they're doing. So what are they actually saying and doing? So for us, it could be that they are saying that they're going to start a podcast, but not just yet. They're not ready yet. Or, it's on the agenda for 6 months' time once they've got certain other books in line, for instance. So there's certain things that they're saying. So you can start to break down the things that they say by different senses. There's then 2 other boxes. One is for pains that they're feeling, which could be fears, frustrations, obstacles. Perhaps the pain for us is the technical pain, but it's the pain of recording in a room by themselves. It's the fear of speaking to the microphone. On the other side of the equation, then you've got the gain. So what is it that they're trying to gain? So for us, it could be a more consistent flow of leads. It could be to protect their time, to only speak to qualified clients. So I quite like the map as a model for saying, okay, they've told you all of this stuff. How does that break down? Because you can then start to think, well, actually, which of these things could I talk on in my messaging, in my sales message, in the communications that I'm putting out in terms of my offer to help? Because if people don't hear your offer to help and go, yeah, actually, I need that, it's just going to pass like a ship in the night.
And is this an exercise that you do after talking to a number of people as a targeted measure for trying to find the thing that helps before you sell? Or is it like a person by person basis kind of model?
It's a great question, Matt, and it's one that came to me as well. And I'm thinking, I don't know whether we had already pressed record or whether it was in the conversation before. I think it might have been before we hit record. I'm having all these great conversations with people, and I'm hearing things. It would be great to have a way of, categorizing and noting stuff down. And I think, Rob, what you just described there is the perfect tool. It'd probably want to be digital though to be able to access it and kind of link things together.
Yeah. My feeling is that you could do it either way. So you could have an empathy map for each person that you speak to. I'm more interested in the stuff that keeps cropping up over and over, because then you've got this factor of triangulation of, is it just a one-off? Have you just spoken to an outlier? Or is it a real signal where once it crops up multiple times across multiple conversations, then you can add it. Then you can add it into the empathy map. So I think you could do it either way.
Unless you've got a really good memory, how are you going to get a sense for whether it keeps cropping up unless you are doing it on a person by person and then kind of aggregating and cross-referencing and
Yeah, I mean that kind of analysis is, I probably take that for granted because that's my modus operandi, taking on a large amount of information and looking for the trends and looking for the patterns. I think you could use AI to potentially, this might be more your sphere and maybe you can comment on better, but perhaps you could feed in a bulk of transcripts into something like Claude or ChatGPT and look for recurring things that ask Claude, what are they saying that they see? What are they saying that they hear? And obviously, you might want to prime that in the questioning by saying, what have you heard about podcasting that's good or bad, or what are you seeing about podcasting that's good or bad? So you can kind of pre-frame their answers by the questions that you would ask them
Amazing.
in the conversation.
Amazing.
Probably a key would be to know how best you work. Like my brain didn't immediately go to AI. It was more, I would more say for people to not worry about making this process perfect. Like a lot of people these days want the step 1, do this, step 2, do this, step 3, do this. Whereas if you've got this and you want to take notes about the people you're talking to on this map and then do a secondary one that you use to take the patterns that you see, the things that crop up a lot, then that'd be a good way to do it. Because I'm a serial note taker. I'm a computer guy primarily, but I prefer to write down notes most of the time, and that's how I retain that information.
Yeah, I make lists about lists. I'm a lists person.
I love
Right.
this that you've shared, Rob. It's excellent.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, for the listener, we can make this available. It's not ours, but I don't have many original ideas, so I don't think any of us have original ideas. That we kind of amalgamate from other sources. But what I like about this is it's simple and it's usable. So I think a good outcome for listening to this conversation might be, if you've got a list of 100, if you've got an email list of 100 people, can you speak to 10 of those people and start to populate this? Because all of this is then going to guide your messaging and just keep you on track and make sure that you don't end up like me in my early Google Ads project, where I just went off into the bushes and did my own thing and got lost.
If I can speak to the podcast piece as well, this is a blind spot that everybody gets, where the focus is always on broadcast and getting an audience, but not necessarily having either the skill or the wherewithal to find a way to interact with that audience. So doing what we're talking about in this episode is super important to keep in mind for the podcaster, podcast host, distributor, publisher, whoever that might be.
It almost seems that we're creating a methodology for helping before you sell. How about that?
It's almost like that, isn't it?
First go in, then go out. I can't wait for the next step. Learning as we go.
Yeah. I have a couple of other ideas to throw at you relating to empathy. Listening is one. I think maybe for most people that's the starting point, because that's immediately actionable. I actually think just simple observation is helpful as well. An observation could be keeping a journal, making a note on the things that you're seeing. I've had mentors in the past who just talk more about being in nature more and actually paying attention. So as we record this episode, tonight's going to be the longest night of the year. And at this time of year, I get quite obsessed with the light and observing when exactly it's getting light and when it gets dark and so on. But just paying active attention to stuff like that. Because then if you're paying attention to the stuff that's going on around you, you start to pay more attention to the things that are relevant to your audience and to your clients as well, potentially. So there's maybe like an active process of observation, I guess is what I'm arguing.
Yeah, I think whether you call it observation or mindfulness or whatever, it's about being present, isn't it? Ultimately, which feeds into the listening piece as well, because you can't truly listen to someone unless you are 100% present with them in the moment.
And it can feel overwhelming with advice like that, saying, make sure you observe everything. Like, don't miss anything. You might miss it, but just don't let things pass you by, and actively engage with those things. And you'll find the things that you need, and you'll be able to work with it.
Partly, I think, why when I came out of drama school 30 odd years ago, with the belief that it doesn't really matter whether you want to be an actor or not, everyone should go to drama school, experience what goes on in drama school for a portion of their time. And I think what we're talking to here is a part of that. That when you're on stage with someone, if you are not 100% present and in the moment and actively listening and observing everything that's going on around, you're a fucking shit actor. and you will not engage with the audience, the literal audience that are out there. And that engagement from the audience comes from witnessing that empathy, I guess, between the actors on the stage. Even if they're antagonists and protagonists, there's still a connection and an engagement which is magnetic in a way to observe.
Every day I go for a walk, at least because I work from home. I make sure that I go out once a day, and I think it's quite easy on my walk to just like get buried in your own thoughts about different projects we've had going on or something that's happened in the morning. And it's actually quite not necessarily hard, but you have to be quite mindful of saying, okay, I'm going to just pay attention to the walk. But obviously, my interest and my background in my work is storytelling, and I think good storytelling is based out of observation. Like the best storytellers aren't the ones that have had the most dramatic stories or the most near death experiences. Not necessarily, anyway. It's the people who just observe what is going on, because that gives you the wealth of raw material to work with and comment on.
And the great thing is, although it may seem overwhelming, as Matt said at the beginning, it is a learned skill and a learned art. You just start. Again, what we say about podcasting being a practice, it's like life is a practice. This is we're all of what we're talking about is like microcosms of living. And this skill of being observant and mindful and aware is not only something which you need in order to be able to help your clients before you sell to them, it's also a skill which is going to benefit and impact all of your life, every aspect. Yeah, because every aspect is a what did you say, Rob? Is a fractal. It's like everything is inside everything else. So the skill that you gain to become more empathetic with your customers is a skill then which leads into other aspects of your life.
The other idea I wanted to throw at you guys was humility. And I feel like I learned humility the hard way by getting into client projects and being kicked in the shins by the universe a few times. Because I think it's one thing to get the feedback. It's another thing to actually really, really listen to it and accept it and adopt stuff that doesn't quite fit with your current worldview, or maybe upsets the apple cart a bit.
Humility is interesting these days, particularly. I'd like to ask, would you two segregate or combine humility and being humble? Because I think we can approach delivering things with humility and be humble and have them be two different things. And the reason that I put them together is because the idea of being humble is now, like, the idea of a humble brag these days has almost become a humble. Like, they're synonymous these days, I think. But humility, I think, is distinctly different.
I think for me, it's about nothing's off the table. Like for anything that you hear, it's about avoiding judgments of what you're hearing too quickly.
Right. So it's taking everything in, evaluating it either objectively or in whatever state that you might be, but not coming in with preconceived notions to what you're receiving as feedback.
Yeah. So when you're having these conversations, it's divergent thinking, not convergent thinking. there is still conversion thinking, but it comes later.
I think it's super important. The humility is huge. Like, it's so easy to dismiss when you've got an objective, and why a lot of the advice that I see that people who are trying to seek their purpose and their mission and their reason for doing things and how to do that effectively before they deliver a product potentially is super important. Because, like we've said, empathy, observe and gather information, actively listen, but having humility about what you hear and perhaps needing to take a different direction with whatever you're, helping with before you sell it. That's where the humility lies. And a lot of people aren't willing to do that these days.
How many not a straight line conversations did you have before you kind of realized something really important or heard something that really challenged your sense of self?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I can. I'm not sure I can answer it. Like, I've got such a bad memory. Like, when I'm in a conversation, I'm like fully present and can join dots and whatever. But my memory of individual conversations is poor. I just know that 40 conversations in, I am a better version of myself than I was at the beginning, if not consciously, then certainly subconsciously. And that it took 40 conversations near as damn it to, and it's what we were talking about here, as my conversations for Not a Straight Line is I'm having empathetic, humilitous conversations with people. I'm listening for an hour and a half, 2 hours. There's nearly 80 hours of listening there that has gone on, and it's taken that amount of time to get some inkling of what it is that I'm really, I don't want to sound too grandiose in terms of here on the planet to do, but some real congruent sense of, if I just did this, I'll be 100% fulfilled, and I will be providing maximum value to the world.
If I could interject, as the editor for the current releases of Not a Straight Line, I think you're looking for an answer that isn't there only because you went into the podcast with that openness ready to go. But the pattern that you've established over those 40 conversations has built the map that allows you to react more deliberately when those different paths come up. Because look, I've got experience with a few other podcasts that have very similar kinds of subject matter and could go in any direction. And you've always been very open for that. But I think if we're thinking about the conductor of an orchestra, the conductor doesn't walk in on the entire orchestra on the night and start directing them from the sheet music. They practice. So you're the conductor engaging these conversations. You get surprised sometimes with the first couple, and you need to figure out where you need to direct your attention to set the rhythm right, or this violinist isn't gelling well with the saxophonist. I don't know if they exist in orchestras very often, but as a conductor for those conversations, you've taken everything in, and now you're at the stage where you're doing. I immediately went to Sydney Myer Music Bowl, but whatever big thing there is in the UK somewhere. Yeah, I think you're the maestro. I think you've always done it, as unhelpful as that is for this discussion. But the way that you've built the map.
No, I think it is helpful, and I think it speaks to the fact there are no shortcuts. That if you help before you sell, you are going to have a stronger, more sustainable, more profitable business. There's no doubt about it. You just look at Chet Holmes about education marketing, look at all the people like Frank Kern who say, if you want to show your customer how you can add value to them, then just add value to them. There's all people far more successful in business and whatever than we are at the moment, who are, you look at HubSpot, that's baked into their growth is help before you sell. I mean, the sixth employee of HubSpot was on a podcast that I co-host, Built by Love, and he said that was one of the things that we came up with right at the very beginning. You can access all of HubSpot's amazing tools and not spend a penny. If you're just a one-man band, it's got a handful of clients, everything about HubSpot's growth is predicated on this help before you sell. But there are no shortcuts. You have to do the work. You have to have the 40 conversations, whatever the equivalent is in your world, to get to the point where you can then start to build on something really, really solid. Would you guys agree?
I was thinking as well, like, let's say webinars are the way that you help. Like, if you do put on a webinar and 3 people show up, like, in some respects, that's quite disheartening, but it's still good feedback on the journey. And it's not a one-time hack. It's not a patch. My other thought was that people are both more like you and less like you than we think. So when you share your story will resonate with people in ways that you never anticipated, because it just does. But they're also less like you. They don't have your life experience. They think differently. It's actually very, the closer you are to your customer base, and when you're the business owner, that's quite close. Like, the harder it is to actually understand what they're thinking. So it's a long term. It's not a patch. It's something that you're going to have to do. Even if you are just speaking to people, maybe you have one conversation a week, and just do it on an ongoing basis over the year. That's 50 plus conversations. That's going to set you in good stead. And while you're having them, why don't you turn it into a podcast as well? Because there's no point. You might as well squeeze more juice from that lemon.
No, because we just say, no, irrespective of what we do, it's like, no, just Rob's absolutely right. Yeah. So what can the listener expect if they're to take action on what they've heard last episode and this episode of what we've been talking about? What can they expect in their business and their life?
I think a much greater sense of clarity, both looking inwards and outwards, and just a bit more confidence in making decisions. Because I think as a business owner, like, there are a lot of big decisions that we make, and unless you have real conviction in them, we tend to procrastinate and avoid making them, and that actually has potentially really bad knock-on effects. So I think the stakes are quite high, actually.
They're high, but if you take things step by step, like listen to last week's episode, listen to this week's episode, then, as long as you're open, as long as you've got humility, as long as you're open to listening to the people and giving good questions.
Don't overcomplicate the next step.
Yeah, one thing at a time. And everybody's seen the 10 weeks to 10K per month for the next 10 years. You can do it in 90 days. That's not pacing it. That's listening to someone and bypassing the empathy and the humility and just going straight to whatever someone else has done, which won't necessarily work for you.
Yeah, and there's the other thought that people overestimate what they can do in a 90-day sprint and underestimate what they can do over 12 months. Perhaps view it as a 12-month project. As we're recording this, it's pretty much Christmas 2024, and it is a time of year when people tend to make plans for the year ahead, but there's no reason why this has to be done at Christmas.
But also, you don't have to finish it in 2024 just because you started it in 2024. You can take what you need.
What's next, Rob? What can the listener expect to look forward to the next episode?
On the next episode, I would like to talk about structure.
Wonderful.
I'd have a rabbit hole conversation to discuss that.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Help Before You Sell, sponsored by Activate Your Podcast. To activate your podcast and help the people who most need you and your services, head to activateyourpodcast.com/help. If you found this episode helpful, please also leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And remember, help more to sell more. See you next time.